Apologize now. Uncle Ray did not shout. That was what made the room go still. His voice crossed the dinner table like a blade laid flat against polished wood. Quiet enough that no one could pretend they had misheard him. Cold enough that even the candles seemed to stop moving. Derek Whitman had his wine glass halfway to his mouth when Ray spoke. The wine trembled faintly against the rim, catching the warm chandelier light above Claire's perfect dining room table. For one suspended second, Derek looked almost confused, like a man who had told himself all night that he controlled the room and had just discovered the room had been watching him instead. Claire stopped breathing. I saw it in the small lift of her shoulders, the way her hand tightened around the linen napkin in her lap. Aunt Beverly's mouth parted, then closed again. Mason, who had been leaning back in his chair with the restless energy of someone too young to know when a family dinner had become dangerous, lowered his phone toward his knee. And every face at that table turned toward me. I sat with my hands folded beside a plate of roast chicken I had barely touched, feeling the heat of the room gather around my skin. I had been shot at in places most people could not spell. I had pushed IV lines into collapsing veins in the back of aircraft. I had listened to men beg for their mothers through blood and dust. But nothing made my body lock down quite like a dining room full of relatives waiting for me to react. Derek laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the brittle kind men use when they have stepped too far and are trying to make everyone else pretend the line was never there. For what? He said, lifting his brows as if Ray had amused him. It was a joke. No one laughed with him. That was when I knew the night had crossed a line that would not be uncrossed. 3 hours earlier, I almost did not get out of my car. I sat at the curb outside Claire and Derek's colonial-style house in Fairfax, Virginia, with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine ticking softly beneath me. The neighborhood looked like it had been designed by someone who believed safety could be arranged with enough brick, mulch, and warm porch lighting. The hedges were trimmed into clean green boxes. The walkway had been swept. A small American flag hung beside the front door, moving gently in the evening breeze. Family cars lined the curb, practical sedans and polished SUVs with out-of-state plates. Through the front windows, I could see gold light, moving shadows, and people already laughing. I could have driven away. No one had seen me yet. I could have put the car in drive, circled the block once, and texted Claire some excuse about a migraine or car trouble. She would have been disappointed, but she would have understood. Claire always tried to understand me, which was sometimes harder to face than judgment. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 36 years old. Hair pulled back tight enough to survive humidity and nerves. Navy blouse buttoned cleanly to the collar. Long sleeves hiding scars that had gone pale and shiny with time. No uniform, no rank, no weapon, no radio pressed to my shoulder, no mission clock in my ear. Just me, Nora Vale, sitting outside a family dinner like I was waiting for extraction. It's just dinner, I whispered. The word sounded ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. Dinner tables can become interrogation rooms if the wrong person decides curiosity gives them permission. I had learned that years earlier, after I came home. People thought they were being kind when they asked what I had done in the Navy. They thought they were showing interest when they leaned in and said, "Come on, you can tell us one story." They wanted danger with dessert, trauma without consequences, a clean little tale that ended with them saying, "Wow, you're a hero," before they returned to their ordinary lives. I hated that word, hero. People used it when they did not know what else to do with the living. They laid it over you like a blanket and expected it to keep the dead quiet. I checked the house again. Claire had begged me to come, not dramatically, not manipulatively, just with that tired hope in her voice that people get before weddings. when they convince themselves one good dinner can repair years of distance. "Please, Nora," she had said over the phone. "Everyone's coming in before the wedding. It would mean a lot if you were there. I know these things aren't easy for you." She was right. They were not. Claire was my sister-in-law by marriage, but over time, she had become something softer and stranger. A person who kept trying to leave a light on for me, even when I did not always come in from the dark. She had married Derek Whitman 8 years earlier. Derek had money, polish, and opinions. He worked in defense consulting in Northern Virginia, which meant he spent a lot of time near people who spoke the language of service without ever having to learn its grief. Claire loved him, or she had at least. I had never been sure what he loved besides the sound of his own certainty. I turned off the engine. The silence inside the car pressed against my ears. I had survived emergency extractions, classified briefings, raids that left my hands shaking for hours afterward, and rooms full of men trying not to cry because the mission report had to sound better than the mission had been. But I sat there like a coward because I did not want to be asked over mashed potatoes why I flinched when someone dropped a fork. I got out anyway. The porch steps were clean. The door opened before I could knock. Claire stood there in a soft green dress, her hair pulled back, her face flushed from kitchen heat and nerves. For half a second, she looked at me like she had been afraid I might disappear from the porch before she could reach me. Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me. "I'm so glad you came," she said into my shoulder. "I know these things aren't easy for you." I hesitated before hugging her back. Physical closeness was still something I had to choose deliberately. But Claire smelled like vanilla, dish soap, and stress, and the relief in her voice loosened something in me. "It's family," I said. "I can handle family." That was not entirely true. Inside, the house was warm enough to fog the edge of my composure. Voices carried from the living room. The table had already been set in the dining room, and Claire had clearly spent all day trying to make the night feel effortless. Roast chicken rested under foil in the kitchen. Mashed potatoes sat in a covered dish near green beans bright with butter and garlic. There was apple pie cooling by the stove. The silverware had been polished. The napkins were folded. Even the candles looked nervous. "Too much?" Claire asked, catching me looking. "It looks beautiful." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I just want tonight to go well." That sentence told me more than she meant it to. The living room was full of Whitmans. Some I had met once or twice, some I knew only by Christmas cards and Claire's explanations. Aunt Beverly sat near the end of the couch, small and sharp-eyed, with hair the color of winter clouds and rings on nearly every finger. Mason, Derek's nephew, was filming a short clip of the room on his phone, narrating in a joking voice about pre-wedding chaos. Two cousins argued about traffic on I-95. Someone laughed near the fireplace. Derek stood there holding court. That was the only way to describe him. He had one elbow braced against the mantel, a glass in hand, and the relaxed posture of a man who had practiced looking effortless. He was 44, good-looking in a polished way, with expensive casual clothes and the kind of haircut that announced he scheduled his confidence every 3 weeks. He was talking loudly about federal contracts, golf, security clearances, and real leadership, moving from one topic to another without ever leaving the center of his own reflection. "The problem with most organizations," he was saying when Claire brought me in, "is that nobody wants to make hard calls anymore. Everybody wants consensus. Everybody wants feelings. But actual safety, actual strategy, that happens when someone can stand up and say, 'This is the call, live with it.'" A cousin nodded like Derek had just explained civilization. Then Derek saw me. His eyes moved over me in a quick assessment. Not overt enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. Men like Derek were always inventorying, clothes, posture, weakness, usefulness, threat. So you're the mysterious Navy sister, he said. Former Navy, I replied. His mouth curved. Former already? You don't look old enough to have done anything serious. Claire's face tightened. Derek, what? He lifted one hand, palm open. I'm being friendly. I had learned a long time ago that silence protects more than ego. It protects energy. It protects the part of you that knows not. Every insult deserves the dignity of a wound. So I did not explain my years of service. I did not explain medical extraction. I did not explain that people often confuse youth with innocence until they have seen a young person do old things under fire. I just said, nice to see you too. Aunt Beverly made a small sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. Derek's smile sharpened. Claire touched my arm. Come say hello to Uncle Ray. Uncle Raymond Whitman sat near the window, apart from the loudest part of the room. At 78, he had the straight-backed stillness of a man whose body had aged but whose attention had not. His hands rested on top of his cane. They were marked by time, veins raised, knuckles thickened, but they were steady. He wore a dark cardigan over a white shirt, and his eyes were pale blue, careful, and too observant to be casual. Ray, Claire said softly. This is Nora. I know, he said. Not, I've heard about you. Not Claire told me. Just, I know. His gaze did not crawl over me the way Derek's had. He looked at my face, then at my hands, then back to my eyes. There was no curiosity in him, no hunger, no need to make me perform. He looked like someone recognizing a weather pattern before the storm arrived. Ma'am, he said. The old military courtesy landed harder than I expected. I gave him a small nod. Sir, one corner of his mouth moved. Not anymore. Some things stick. His eyes changed at that. Not much. Enough. Dinner was called 10 minutes later. I chose a chair with my back to the wall, facing the room, with a clear view of the front door and the hallway to the kitchen. I did it without thinking. I had spent years selecting seats that way, reading exits before menus, counting bodies before introductions. Derek noticed before I had even unfolded my napkin. Old habit? He asked from across the table. Or are you expecting an ambush at dinner? A few people laughed awkwardly. It was the laughter of people hoping the comment was harmless enough to pass over. Habit, I said. Uncle Ray, seated 2 chairs to my left, stopped smiling. The first part of dinner was almost normal. That was what made it worse later, I think. There were wedding plans to discuss, cousins to catch up with, traffic to complain about, weather to mention as if anyone cared. Claire moved between kitchen and table until Aunt Beverly scolded her into sitting down. Mason filmed everyone raising a toast to the bride and groom, then filmed the pie because he said his followers would appreciate old-school family aesthetics. Someone teased him for saying aesthetics at dinner. I listened more than I spoke. That was not unusual for me. In civilian rooms, I preferred the edges. I had spent too much of my life in environments where speaking at the wrong time could cost someone, and silence had become less a personality trait than a discipline. But Derek kept circling back to me like a man bothered by an unopened drawer. So, Nora, he said once the plates were half empty, Claire tells me you're thinking of staying in Virginia. For a while. Doing what? Maybe working with a veteran transition program. Transitioning them from what exactly? Claire set her fork down. Derek. He blinked at her. What? It's a normal question. I looked at him. I'd be helping people navigate medical appointments, employment, housing, that kind of thing. Right, he said. Support services. The way he said support made it sound like something soft, decorative, unnecessary. Aunt Beverly turned to me kindly. And what did you do while you were in the Navy, dear? There it was. The question always came, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with the giddy anticipation of someone hoping for a story they could retell later. I gave my standard answer: operation support and medical extraction. Derek laughed. That sounds like a polished resume answer. It's the answer I'm allowed to give. Convenient. The table shifted, not physically exactly, emotionally. There is a pressure change that happens when people realize a conversation is no longer just conversation. Claire's eyes flashed toward Derek. Ray's jaw tightened, one small muscle jumping beneath his skin. No offense, Derek said, leaning back, but people hear classified and suddenly every desk job becomes a secret mission. I set my water glass down carefully. No offense usually means offense is coming. Aunt Beverly's mouth twitched. Derek did not like that. I'm just saying, he continued, in my world, people throw around words like special operations and security and classified because they know no one can check. It becomes a kind of currency. I didn't say special operations, I said. No, Claire did. Claire's face went pale. I told you that in confidence, she said quietly. Derek shrugged. We're all family. That was when I knew this had not been an accident. He had come prepared with scraps of information, pieces Claire had mentioned privately, things he had stored and polished into weapons. He did not want to know what I had done. He wanted to prove I had not done enough. Ray spoke for the first time in several minutes. Let the woman eat. Derek turned toward him with a smile that would have fooled someone less tired. Uncle Ray, I'm asking normal questions. No, Ray said. You're asking questions like you already chose the answer. The silence after that was brief but heavy. Derek broke it with a laugh. Oh, well, forgive me for not automatically saluting every vague military story that walks into the house. My pulse slowed. That may sound strange. People think anger speeds you up. Sometimes it does. But real danger, the kind my body recognized before my mind formed words, made everything slow down. The candle flame beside Claire's centerpiece stretched taller. Mason's phone shifted in his hand. A butter knife lay crooked beside Derek's plate. Claire's wedding ring caught the light as she curled her fingers inward. I considered leaving. It would have been easy to stand, thank Claire, tell everyone I was tired, and step out into the night. I had done it before. Leave before the room asks for blood. Leave before someone tries to turn your restraint into guilt. Leave before the past comes up from under the floorboards and sits at the table with you. But Claire had asked me to come. This weekend mattered to her. The wedding mattered to the family. And I had survived worse than Derek Whitman, so I stayed. The conversation limped onward. People tried to pull it back toward safe ground. Wedding flowers, hotel rooms, the weather forecast, someone's delayed flight. But Derek had tasted the attention he wanted. He kept glancing at me over his wine glass, smiling to himself, waiting for the next opening. It came by accident. Mason started telling a story about college nicknames. Someone had called him Moose for 2 years after he broke a dorm couch during freshman orientation. Aunt Beverly said Ray had once had a nickname in the service, but he gave her such a look that she waved a hand and said, never mind, I value my life. People laughed, genuinely this time. Derek turned his head slowly toward me. There was pleasure in his face. Come on, Nora, he said. If you were really in some intense Navy unit, you had to have a nickname. Claire whispered, Derek, don't. He smiled wider. What? I'm sure it's a great story. I looked at Claire first. Her embarrassment had turned into alarm. Then I looked at Ray. He had gone completely still. I should have lied. I could have said no. I could have given some harmless answer. Doc, Vale, Navy, anything. But there are some names you do not cheapen by hiding from a fool, even if you hate them, even if they hurt. I set down my fork. Gravedog, I said. For a moment, no one moved. Then a cousin gave a nervous laugh. Someone murmured, That's intense. Mason lowered his phone, but not all the way. The screen went dark, though later I would learn the audio had kept running for a few seconds longer. Aunt Beverly stared at me with a hand pressed lightly to her chest. Derek laughed the loudest. Gravedog? He said. Seriously? That sounds like a biker bar name. The room did not laugh with him this time. I heard Eli Mercer's voice before I could stop it. Not clearly. Not like a ghost. Memory's not that kind. It does not politely announce itself. It kicks open doors. 1 second, I was in Claire's dining room with a linen napkin across my lap. The next, I smelled dust, hot metal, old blood. I heard a broken radio spitting static. I felt a hand gripping my sleeve hard enough to bruise. Don't you let the grave keep the one still breathing, Gravedog. I pressed my thumb against the side of my fork until the edge bit skin. Derek kept going. No, come on, he said. Who gave you that? Yourself? Claire snapped. Derek, stop. I'm kidding, he said. If it's real, she can take a joke. Not all jokes are harmless, I said. Derek's eyes narrowed. Not all stories are true. That was when Ray placed his glass down very carefully. Apologize. Now. And that brought us to the moment when every person at the table seemed to be holding their breath, and Derek Whitman, arrogant enough to confuse discomfort with victory, laughed and said it had been a joke. Ray did not blink. For laughing at a name you are too ignorant to recognize, he said. The air left the room. Aunt Beverly whispered, Ray. But Ray's eyes stayed on Derek. Derek lowered his wine glass slowly. You know this name? I know enough. Enough from where? Some veteran rumor mill? Ray's expression darkened. It was not anger exactly. It was disappointment sharpened by history. I had seen that look on older men before. Men who had survived wars, young men now turned into metaphors. It was the look of someone watching arrogance step into a graveyard with muddy shoes. Ray, I said quietly, you don't have to. He looked at me then, and something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Not of details. Of weight. Maybe I do, he said. Derek scoffed. This is unbelievable. No, Ray said. What is unbelievable is that you have spent all night mistaking cruelty for intelligence. Claire closed her eyes. I turned toward Derek. You don't owe me admiration. You owe people basic respect before you decide they're lying. Respect is earned, Derek shot back. Ray's voice was low. So is silence. And she earned hers. The words struck something in me I had not prepared to defend. Silence was not emptiness. It was not evasion. It was often the last clean thing a person owned after everyone else had taken pieces of the story. Derek looked around the table, searching for support. He found none. That only made him harder. If this is all so sacred, Buckus, he said, then someone tell me what she supposedly did. No, I said. Because you can't? Because I won't bleed on a table just to satisfy you. The room went utterly still. Derek's face flushed. You people are acting like I committed some crime by asking questions. Claire looked at him as if he had become a stranger in his own dining room. This isn't who you need to be tonight. He turned on her. Don't make me the villain because I'm the only one asking questions. You're not asking, she said. You're accusing. I'm being realistic. You're being cruel. That landed. I saw it hit him, saw the flash of humiliation before he buried it under anger. Derek could tolerate being challenged by me. I was the outsider at the table, the convenient target, the quiet woman with the vague past. But Claire's disappointment had nowhere easy to go. It came from inside the life he had built. Ray leaned forward slightly. Derek, he said, I am going to say this once. Leave it alone. Derek stared at him. Or what? Or you will learn something about your own family that you are not ready to carry. The sentence changed the temperature of the room. Claire looked at Ray. What does that mean? Derek's irritation faltered. Don't do that. Do what? Ray asked. Talk like you know something about my family I don't. Ray's gaze did not waver. I might. A cold thread moved through my stomach. Until that moment, I had thought Ray recognized the nickname from one of the closed rooms, where stories moved carefully among veterans and families. Some names do. They travel in whispers, attached to missions that never get public ceremonies, to people who never show up in documentaries, to debts that cannot be repaid because the records are sealed and the dead are still dead. But Ray had said your own family. I looked at him. He looked back, and I saw apology in his eyes before he said a word. Number? The thought rose before I understood it. Derek's father had been a contractor overseas. I knew that vaguely from Claire. Thomas Whitman, late father, logistics, complicated health after coming home. Derek spoke about him in fragments, usually when he wanted to add weight to his own opinions about leadership and risk. I had never paid much attention. Whitman was common enough. Contractors were everywhere in those years, moving through conflict zones with clipboards, cargo lists, radios, and families waiting for calls back home. But now, the name Thomas Whitman moved through my mind like a door opening. Tom Whitman. T. Whitman, a face half covered in dust, a man barely conscious, gripping my wrist and saying, "My son, tell my son I tried." I felt the table tilt beneath me. Ray saw the recognition happen. Derek did not. "What exactly did your father tell you?" Ray asked him. "About the year he came home early?" Derek's chair scraped faintly as he shifted. "Don't bring my father into this. You brought him in when you used him to make yourself sound right." "My father dealt with contractors overseas," Derek said. "He never came home acting like some secret legend." Ray's voice went even quieter. "No, he came home alive." Derek stared at him. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means alive is not a small thing." Claire looked between them. "Ray, what are you saying?" I shook my head once. "Ray, don't." Derek turned toward me sharply. "Don't what?" Ray's face softened when he looked at me. He asked for proof. "That doesn't mean he deserves it," I said. "No," Ray replied, "but his father might." Derek stood halfway from his chair, then stopped, both palms pressed against the table. "This is disgusting. You're dragging my dead father into some dinner table war story because I hurt her feelings?" Ray's voice hardened. "Your father was dragged into that story long before tonight." No one spoke. Derek looked pale now under his anger. "You're lying." Ray's mouth tightened. Thomas knew the name Gravedog. No, he didn't. He wrote it down. Aunt Beverly covered her mouth. Claire whispered, "Derek." But Derek was staring at Ray with the expression of a man watching a wall crack in a house he thought he owned. Ray pushed back his chair and stood. It took effort. He was old enough that movement had become negotiation. But there was nothing weak in him as he reached for his cane. "Ray," Aunt Beverly said, her voice trembling. "Are you sure?" He looked at her. "I should have done this years ago." Then he left the dining room. The silence he left behind was worse than his presence. Derek sat down slowly, as if his knees had become uncertain. He kept his eyes on the doorway through which Ray had disappeared. "This is insane," he said, but the words had lost force. No one answered. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in me pointed toward the front door, toward air, darkness, distance. I had lived years keeping the missions sealed behind careful language and sleepless nights. I had refused interviews. I had refused ceremonies. I had moved through civilian life like a woman carrying a locked box inside her chest. And now Ray was upstairs or down the hall or wherever he kept old things, looking for a key I had not given him. Claire reached toward my hand. "Don't touch me right now," I said. She froze, hurt flashing across her face before she understood. I forced myself to breathe. "I'm trying to stay here." Her hand withdrew slowly. "Okay." That one word, gentle and immediate, nearly broke me more than Derek's cruelty had. Mason sat perfectly still. His phone was face down on the table now. Aunt Beverly was crying quietly, though nothing had yet been revealed. Maybe age teaches people to recognize the shape of grief before it speaks. Derek looked at me. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. "Did you know my father?" he asked. The answer sat in my throat like glass. "I don't know yet," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have until Ray comes back." But I did know, not fully. Not the man Thomas had been before or after. Not the father Derek had lost. But I knew the weight of him on my shoulder. I knew the drag of his boots against broken flooring. I knew his voice, ruined by thirst and smoke, whispering about his son. Ray returned carrying a small metal lockbox. The box was dark gray, worn at the corners, with a small brass lock. He set it beside his plate. The sound of metal against wood cracked through the room. Derek stared at it. "This is theater." Ray looked at him. "No, this is what happens when arrogance keeps asking for evidence." He took a key from his pocket. It hung on a small ring with two others, old-fashioned and dull with use. His hands were steady as he unlocked the box. Inside were letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a photograph in a yellowing envelope, a challenge coin wrapped in cloth, and several folded pages. Ray did not rush. That was almost unbearable. He handled each object with the care of someone moving bones. Finally, he drew out one folded sheet. I saw the handwriting before I saw the words. My lungs closed. Ray looked at Derek. "Your father gave this to me years after he came home," he said. "He was not ready to tell you. He said maybe one day he would be. He wasn't. Then he got sick. After the funeral, I almost gave it to you. I should have. But grief makes cowards of the living, too." Derek's voice was flat. "My father wouldn't hide something like this from me." Ray's eyes softened with pity, which Derek seemed to hate most of all. "Your father hid pain the way most men of his generation did," Ray said. "Quietly, badly, completely." He held out the letter. Derek did not take it. Claire's voice shook. "Derek, read it." "No," Derek said. "This is manipulation." I looked at him then. Whatever softness I might have had was gone. "You asked for proof," I said. "Don't get delicate now." He flinched as if I had slapped him. Mason leaned forward. He was pale, younger than he had looked half an hour before. "Can I?" he asked. Ray studied him for a moment, then nodded and handed him the page. Mason took it with both hands. His voice was uncertain when he began, but it steadied as the room listened. "I don't know how to write this without sounding like a man trying to make himself feel less ashamed. Maybe that is what I am. Maybe this is what shame sounds like when it finally gets tired of being silent." Claire covered her mouth. Derek stared at the table. Mason continued. "I was not brave. I need whoever reads this to understand that first. I did not face death well. I did not think of country or duty or honor. I thought of my son. I thought of Derek at 8 years old, standing in the driveway with a baseball glove too big for his hand. I thought of all the times I had told him I would be home soon. And I realized there are promises a man makes casually because he has never had to test them." Mason stopped and swallowed. No one moved. He read on. "They kept us in a room without windows. I do not know how many days had passed by then. The air tasted like rust and sickness. There was gunfire outside, then shouting, then smoke. Someone said Americans had come. Someone else said they had left. I remember thinking that made sense. Men leave when the cost gets too high. I'd left things in my life, too." Derek whispered. "Stop!" Ray's voice cut in. "No. You wanted her opened up. Now listen." Mason looked at his uncle. Derek said nothing. "The first team pulled some of us out," Mason read. "I do not blame them for what happened next. I want that written clearly. They were hurt. They were outnumbered. The whole place was confusion. I remember being moved, then dropped, then dragged, then losing time. When I woke again, I was back behind a broken wall with two others, and I could hear men outside arguing through radios. Someone said, 'Pull back.' Someone said, 'No second entry.' Someone said we had everyone accounted for. They were wrong." My vision blurred at the edges. I remembered that. The count had been wrong. I had said it 3 times. No one believed me because bad numbers delivered with confidence often beat truth delivered through blood. Mason's voice trembled. I believed in that moment that the world had decided I was not worth the cost. Then she came back. Claire made a small sound. She came through smoke and dust like something the grave itself had failed to hold. I never knew her real name. Not then. The others called her Gravedog. I thought at first it was a cruel name. Later, I understood it was a promise. She was injured. She was furious. She cursed at me for trying to close my eyes. She told me if I could argue, I could move. I told her I had a son. She said, "Then stand up like you mean to see him." Derek's face crumpled for half a second before he forced it still. Mason read the next line slowly, each word landing hard. "If my son ever asks why I came home, tell him it was because Gravedog disobeyed an order that better men were too afraid to question." The room broke, not loudly. No one screamed, but something gave way. Aunt Beverly wept into her napkin. Claire's eyes filled and spilled over. Mason lowered the page slightly, blinking fast. Even Ray closed his eyes. Derek had gone white. "That could be anyone," he whispered. "Gravedog could be anyone." Ray reached into the lockbox and removed the old photograph. It was faded at the edges, colors washed by time. He handed it first to Derek, but Derek did not move. So Ray placed it flat on the table and turned it toward him. I did not want to look. I looked anyway. Thomas Whitman was younger in the photo than Derek was now, thinner than he should have been, his face hollowed by captivity and recovery. He stood among several rescued survivors near what looked like the side of a transport aircraft. His arm was in a sling. A blanket hung around his shoulders. Behind him, half turned away from the camera, was a younger version of me in partial gear, hair tucked under a cap, face streaked with grime. Eli Mercer's hand rested on my shoulder at the edge of the frame. Eli. For a second, the room disappeared. Ray turned the photograph over. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, were the words, "The woman in the corner is the one who came back." Claire looked at me. "Nora, was that him?" My mouth was dry. "Yes." Derek looked up. I met his eyes. "I didn't know he was your father until Ray said his name." He tried to speak. Nothing came out. Ray's voice was gentle and merciless. "You laughed at the name your father could barely speak without crying." Derek lowered his face into his hands. Claire turned toward him, and the look she gave him was not anger anymore. It was grief. "You didn't embarrass her," she said. "You embarrassed yourself." "I didn't know," he whispered. Claire's answer came like a verdict. "You didn't need to know. You only needed to be decent." Derek's shoulders moved with one hard breath. Then he looked at me, and I saw the first real crack in him. Not the embarrassment of being proven wrong, not the panic of losing control. Something deeper. A man realizing the story he had mocked had been holding up the floor of his own life. "Why didn't my father tell me?" he asked. "That's not mine to answer. But you were there. I was there. That doesn't make me the owner of his grief." Ray folded his hands over the top of his cane. "Thomas came home ashamed," he said. "Ashamed of surviving, ashamed of needing to be carried out, ashamed that others died and he didn't. He tried to find her for years, quietly, couldn't. Names like that don't come with addresses. He gave anonymously to veteran charities. Later, he started a scholarship fund." I looked at him sharply. Ray nodded. "Eli Mercer." The name entered the room differently than mine had. Gently, carefully, as if everyone understood somehow that it deserved clean hands. I stared at the photograph. Eli's hand on my shoulder. Eli alive in the corner of an old picture I had never seen. "He did that?" I asked. "Every year until he died," Ray said. "After that, I kept it going for a while. Not as much. Enough to keep the name alive." I had spent years believing Thomas Whitman was just one of the survivors who vanished back into civilian life. Another man I had carried out and never heard from again. I had told myself that was enough. Survival was enough. But there he had been, somewhere beyond my knowledge, saying Eli's name with money and memory because he could not say mine out loud. Ray unwrapped the challenge coin from the cloth and held it out to me. "Thomas asked me to give this to Gravedog if I ever found her." I shook my head. "No." "Nora." "No, it isn't a medal," Ray said. It's a thank you from a man who never found the courage to say it in person. The coin sat in his palm, small and heavy-looking. I recognized the emblem stamped on one side, though not the unit. On the other side, someone had engraved 2 words by hand. Came back. My fingers shook when I took it. Derek watched like each movement cost him something. Finally, he said, "Nora, I'm sorry." The apology was quiet. It might even have been sincere. But sincerity does not erase impact. Regret does not rewind the knife. I looked at him. "You're sorry because you found out the story touched you." He flinched. "The problem," I said, "is that you should have been sorry when you thought it only belonged to me." No one rescued him from that. To their credit, no one tried. Ray folded the letter and placed it in front of Derek. "Read the rest alone," he said. "Your father deserved that much from you." For the first time all night, Derek Whitman had nothing to say, and the silence did what my anger never could. It made him sit with himself. I should have stopped there. Maybe if I had, the night would have ended with Derek's shame, Ray's letter, Claire's tears, and the family quietly pretending Pi could make things normal again. But half-truths have a way of rotting under the floor. Once Ray opened the box, the past was already in the room. Everyone had seen the outline of it. They had touched the edges. They had heard Thomas's gratitude, his shame, his version of the rescue, but they had not heard mine. I looked at the photograph again, not at Thomas, at Eli. Eli Mercer had been 31 when he died. He had a laugh that came too easily, a gift for making terrified people angry enough to live, and a habit of naming things he did not want to admit he loved. Bad coffee became liquid regret. Our team's oldest transport vehicle became Grandma Thunder. Me, because I refused to leave training casualties behind even when the exercise clock had expired, became Gravedog. At first, I hated it. Then he died saying it. I heard myself speak before I decided to. "If I tell this," I said, "I'm telling it once." Claire lifted her head. Derek looked at me with wet, stunned eyes. Ray gave the smallest nod, like a man accepting testimony. I folded my hands under the table so no one would see them shake. "The mission was supposed to be quick," I began. "They always tell you that when they know it won't be." No one interrupted. I looked past them, not because I wanted drama, but because eye contact would have pulled me back into the dining room too soon. To tell the truth, I had to stand halfway in memory. There were American contractors and aid personnel taken after a convoy disruption outside a regional compound. That's the clean way to say it. The truth is, people got grabbed because someone promised a route was secure when it wasn't. Intelligence said they were being held in a low-structure building with light guard presence. We were told the hostages were clustered, mobile, and likely guarded by a small group. Urgent timeline, limited window, incomplete overhead. Political pressure breathing down everyone's neck. Derek had stopped wiping his face. He listened now the way people listen when the story has become too costly to doubt. My role was medical extraction and survivor movement. That meant I was there to keep people alive long enough to get them out, and to get them moving when panic or blood loss or shock made their bodies forget they could. I was not the biggest person on the team. I was not the loudest. I was not the one who kicked doors for fun. I was the one who looked at a room and decided who would die first if I chose wrong. Mason swallowed hard. Eli Mercer was on that team. The name trembled in the air. He was my closest friend in the service. Not because we were alike, we weren't. Eli was sunshine with a weapon and a medical kit. He could make jokes under pressure without making pressure feel small. He remembered birthdays. He wrote actual letters to his sister's kids. He talked people through pain like he was leading them across a creek, one rock at a time. He was infuriatingly optimistic for someone who had seen enough to know better. A faint, impossible smile touched my mouth. He called me Gravedog during training, We had a casualty evacuation drill in miserable weather, mud up to our calves, instructors yelling, clock blown, everyone exhausted. The scenario was over, the instructors called it. But there was one dummy still halfway down an embankment, and I kept dragging it because I was mad at the idea of leaving even fake weight behind. Ray's eyes softened. Eli shouted, "Look at Fail! Once she decides someone is coming home, not even death gets to keep them without a fight." Then he started calling me Gravedog. I told him I hated it. He said that was how he knew it fit. No one laughed. I was grateful for that. On the night of the mission, we knew something was wrong almost immediately. Bad intelligence doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself 1 second after you needed the truth. The building layout was wrong, the guard presence was wrong, the number of people inside was wrong, communications were unstable from the start, and the extraction route became compromised faster than anyone wanted to admit. I could smell smoke again. We entered under conditions that were already deteriorating. There was shouting in at least 3 directions. Hostages were not where they were supposed to be. Some had been moved into interior spaces, some were injured, some were so dehydrated they could not stand without help. One man kept asking what day it was. Another tried to fight us because he thought we were part of the group holding him. That happens more than people think. Fear does not check uniforms. Derek's lips parted, but he said nothing. I found Thomas Whitman behind a reinforced interior partition with several others. I did not know his full name then. I saw an ID tag. T. Whitman. Logistics contractor. Male. Dehydrated. Concussed. Smoke exposure. Possible rib fractures. He was drifting in and out. He kept saying, "My son. Tell my son I tried." Derek closed his eyes. I did not promise him anything. People think promises are comfort. In the field, promises can be cruelty. You don't tell someone they're going home unless you know you can make it true. I told him to breathe when I told him. I told him to move when I pulled. I told him to stay awake because sleep was not his friend. Claire wiped her face silently. We got some people moving, not cleanly, not like movies. People fell, people screamed, someone vomited from pain. Someone else kept apologizing for slowing us down. I remember saying, "Apologize later." I remember Eli laughing over the radio and saying, "That's her bedside manner." My throat tightened. Then the first withdrawal went bad. For a while, I could not speak. No one rushed me. I took water. My hand shook when I lifted the glass, so I set it back down untouched. We were moving through a compromised corridor when the situation shifted. I won't give tactical details. They don't matter for this. What matters is that everything narrowed. Noise, smoke, wrong turns, bodies moving too fast and too slow at the same time. Eli was helping move a wounded survivor when he was hit. Aunt Beverly made a soft sound of grief. I got to him. I did what I was trained to do. Pressure, airway, assessment, hands working faster than thought. He was conscious at first, angry mostly. Eli had this ridiculous, offended look when he was hurt, like his body had insulted him personally. A tear slid down my face. I did not wipe it away. He knew. Before I did, I think, or maybe I knew and refused to know. He grabbed my sleeve. He said, "Don't you let the grave keep the one still breathing, Gravedog." The words filled the room and changed it. That was the last time he called me that. I looked at Derek. So when you laughed tonight, that is what you laughed at. Not a nickname, not a war story, a dying man's last order to someone who loved him. Derek covered his mouth again. I looked away. The command came to withdraw. Pull back. Regroup. No second entry without authorization. From a distance, that probably made sense. Several team members were injured. The environment had changed. The count, according to someone somewhere with partial information, said the survivors were accounted for. Ray whispered, "They weren't." "No," I said, "they weren't." I folded and unfolded my napkin once, then forced my hands still. I made it outside. I remember the air feeling wrong because it was open. That sounds strange, but after being inside smoke and concrete and screaming, open air can feel like betrayal. I was treating someone near the extraction point when I heard a broken transmission through a damaged radio. It was weak, maybe not even meant for us. Tapping at first, then a voice. I couldn't make out words, just enough to know someone was still inside. Thomas, Derek said, barely audible. I didn't know that at first. I argued the count was wrong. I said we had at least 2, maybe 3 missing from the interior group. People were shouting. Command was trying to establish order. Someone told me to stand down. Someone else told me I was concussed. I may have been. It would not have made me wrong. Mason let out a shaky breath. There are different kinds of dying, I said. One of them is walking away while someone still believes you might come back. No one spoke. So I went back. I said it plainly because there was no heroic way to say it. The act itself had not felt heroic. It had felt like failure refusing to become final. I did not make a speech. I did not run dramatically through fire while music played. I checked what I had left, ignored someone telling me not to be stupid, and turned around. A teammate grabbed my arm. He was bleeding through his sleeve. He said, "Vale, you go back in there, and they'll bury you with paperwork if nothing else." I told him, "Then write me up if I live. Ray lowered his head, and I thought I saw the ghost of a smile. The second entry was worse. The building had shifted. Lights were gone in places. Smoke sat low and thick. My own injury was starting to matter. I could feel it every time I breathed, but adrenaline is a liar with generous credit. It lets you borrow from tomorrow until tomorrow comes to collect." Claire hugged her arms around herself. I found Thomas with 2 others behind a collapsed section. One was unconscious, one was praying. Thomas looked at me like I was not real. He said, "You came back." I said, "Don't make me regret it." He laughed, or tried to. Then he coughed until I thought he would pass out. Derek's tears had started again, silent and helpless. I told him to stand. He said he couldn't. I told him if he could argue with me, he could move. He said something about his son again. I said, "Then stand up like you mean to see him." The same words from the letter. Derek bent forward as if they physically hurt. I did not carry everyone at once. That's not how bodies work. I moved people in stages, dragged one to cover, went back, got another moving, used what I had, improvised what I didn't, yelled when kindness failed, lied when truth would have made them stop. There are moments in rescue when you become the meanest person in the room because survival does not always respond to gentleness. I could feel Eli's hand on my sleeve again. At some point, backup pushed forward. I don't remember who got there first. I remember someone yelling over comms, "Gravedog is still inside." That was how the name spread, not because it was cool, not because I wanted it, because it became shorthand for a problem command could not neatly solve. Gravedog is still inside meant the count is wrong. Gravedog is still inside meant someone living remains. Gravedog is still inside meant the mission is not over just because the report wants it to be. Ray's eyes were wet now. We got Thomas out. We got others out, not everyone. The last 2 words weighed more than all the rest. Eli was dead. Another teammate never fully recovered from his injuries. The mission became politically sensitive almost immediately. There were questions about bad intelligence, bad counting, bad communication, bad timing. People wanted clean reports. Clean reports are easier to file than messy truth. I was praised in private and punished in paperwork. That is how institutions sometimes handle inconvenient courage. They shake your hand in one room and build your reprimand in another. Derek looked up. They punished you for saving them? They punished me for disobeying. But you were right. Being right does not always protect you from systems built to avoid embarrassment. Claire's face hardened at that, not with anger at me, but at something larger. I left earlier than expected, I said. Not because I was weak, because every ceremony after that felt dishonest. I could not stand people using words like honor while refusing to say Eli's name. I could not stand being called brave by men who had signed reports designed to make the mission look less broken than it was. I could not become a poster story. So I disappeared into civilian life as much as a person can disappear from themselves. The dining room was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Claire whispered, "You carried that alone?" I shook my head. "No, I carried it quietly. That's different." Derek wiped his face with both hands. "Did my father know Eli died?" he asked. "Yes." "Is that why he never talked about it?" "Maybe. Survival can feel like theft when someone else pays for it." His face twisted. I looked down at the photograph again and touched the corner where Eli's hand rested on my shoulder. "That's why I don't laugh when people say Gravedog," I said. "The name you treated like a costume was the last word a dying man gave me." Derek stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the hardwood with a sound that made Claire flinch. For a second, I thought he was going to storm out, retreat into anger because shame was too honest to bear. Instead, he walked into the hallway and braced one hand against the wall, back turned to us, head bowed. No one followed at first. The dinner table looked wrecked. The food had gone cold. The candles had burned low. Wine sat untouched in glasses that had seemed festive an hour earlier. The letter lay in front of Derek's empty chair. The photograph was still near Ray's hands. The challenge coin felt impossibly heavy in my palm. Claire rose. She hesitated, looking at me as if asking permission she had no right to ask and no need to receive. "Go," I said. She followed Derek into the hallway, but she stopped several feet away from him. Their voices carried because old houses and broken moments do not respect privacy. "You heard her because you wanted to be right," Claire said. Derek's voice was rough. "I didn't know it was my father." "That's the part that scares me." Silence. Claire continued, quieter but still audible. "You only care because now it belongs to you." Derek made a sound like he had tried to speak and failed. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she said. "Maybe not the damage, but you meant the humiliation. You meant to make her smaller. You meant to prove she was exaggerating because her silence made you feel insecure. You thought cruelty looked like intelligence." Those words hung between them. I looked away. Not because I wanted to spare Derek, but because Claire's grief deserved not to be watched too closely. Ray sat beside me, silent. After a while, he said, "You did not have to tell them." "I know. Why did you?" I looked at the coin in my hand. "Because the letter made him a survivor in Derek's story. Eli deserved to be more than a shadow in mine." Ray nodded once. In the hallway, Derek said something too low to hear. Claire answered, "No, don't ask me to make you feel better right now. Sit with it." Aunt Beverly leaned back in her chair and exhaled through tears. "I always told that boy confidence is not the same thing as character." Mason, who had not moved much since reading the letter, picked up his phone. My body tensed before I could stop it. He noticed. "I'm deleting it," he said quickly. "The clip. I was recording earlier before it got bad. It caught some audio after the nickname thing." Derek, returning slowly from the hallway with Claire behind him, heard that and looked stricken. Mason tapped the screen several times, then turned it toward me without getting too close. "Gone," he said. "This isn't mine to post." The fact that he understood that at 24 gave me more hope than I expected. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, eyes red. Derek returned to his chair but did not sit immediately. He looked at the letter, then at Ray, then at me. "May I read the rest?" he asked. Ray's answer was simple. "You should." Derek sat down and picked up the page with hands that no longer looked steady. He read silently. No one spoke while he did. The room gave him that much mercy, though not comfort. I watched his face change as his father's words entered him. Later, Claire told me the rest of the letter contained things Thomas had never said aloud. Gratitude, shame, love for his son. Fear that Derek would grow into a man who admired strength without understanding tenderness. Regret over all the moments he had been distant after coming home. A confession that he had sometimes looked at his boy and felt unbearable joy followed by unbearable guilt because another man had died while he lived to become a father again. But one line Derek read aloud himself. His voice broke around it. If my boy grows into a man who speaks too quickly, remind him that someone once crossed fire for a stranger with our name. He folded over the page then, one hand covering his mouth. He cried quietly, not performatively, not dramatically. No one rushed to hold him. Even Claire stayed where she was. Some grief must first land on the person who earned it. Ray watched him with hard compassion. Now you understand a little, he said. Not enough, but a little. Derek nodded without lifting his head. Several minutes passed before he stood. When he faced me, the performance was gone. No sarcasm, no polished defense, just a man who had been stripped down to the truth of what he had done and found himself smaller than he wanted to be. I mocked something sacred because I thought being skeptical made me smart, he said. It made me cruel. I am sorry. I studied him. There are apologies that ask to be admired. There are apologies that are just negotiations in clean clothes. Derek's did not feel clean. It felt bruised. It felt unfinished. That made it more believable. I accept that you're sorry, I said. I'm not ready to pretend it didn't happen. He nodded. I understand. No, I said. You don't, but maybe you can start. He swallowed. Is there anything I can do? Start by not turning my pain into your redemption story. Claire closed her eyes briefly, like that sentence had hurt and healed something in her at the same time. Derek absorbed it. To his credit, he did not argue. Ray pointed one finger toward him. You learned this lesson at a dinner table, he said. Be grateful. Some men learn it at a bedside, a funeral, or not at all. Derek looked at him. Yes, sir, he said. For once, he meant it. No one knew what to do after that. That is one of the strange cruelties of revelation. Life does not provide stage directions after the truth. The table remained set. The chicken was still there, cold beneath its glossy skin. The potatoes had stiffened in their serving dish. The green beans looked tired. Apple pie waited in the kitchen because Claire had baked it in hope before the night became something else. Finally, Claire stood. I'm getting the pie, she said. No one wanted pie. Everyone accepted a slice. Maybe we needed something ordinary to do with our hands. We ate in quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not yet. But no one performed. No one filled space just to own it. Derek took 2 bites and then set his fork down. Claire ate mechanically. Aunt Beverly dabbed at her eyes. Mason looked older than he had at the start of dinner. Ray drank coffee like a man who had survived worse rooms and still hated this one. After a while, I stepped outside. The night air hit my face cold and clean. I stood on the porch with both hands wrapped around the challenge coin, looking out at the quiet Fairfax street. The same cars lined the curb. The same flag moved gently near the doorway. The same trimmed hedges stood where they had before dinner. It offended me a little, how unchanged the outside world could remain after an interior collapse. The porch door opened behind me. Ray came out slowly, leaning on his cane. I can go back in, he said, if you want to be alone. If I wanted to be alone, I would have left. He accepted that and stood beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ray said, Thomas wanted to thank you. He lived, Hakeem, I said. That was enough. Maybe for you, not for him. I looked down at the coin. Came back. He started that scholarship after he tracked down Eli's name, Ray said. Took him a while. He had help from people who knew how to ask quiet questions. He never wanted attention for it. Why Eli? Because he knew a man died that night and he lived. He could not carry that evenly. Maybe no one could. I closed my fist around the coin. I wish I'd known. I do too. The honesty in that was enough. No excuse, No dramatic confession, just an old man admitting a delay had cost someone. Why didn't you tell Derek after Thomas died? I asked. Ray looked out at the street. Because Derek was grieving and angry, because I told myself it was not the time. Because I did not want to be the man who handed him more pain. Because sometimes we call fear mercy when we don't want to admit it's fear. I respected him more for saying it. Inside, through the window, I could see Derek sitting alone at the table reading his father's letter again. Claire stood near him, but did not touch him. That distance said more than anger would have. Their marriage had not ended in that dining room, but it had been forced to look in a mirror. Sometimes that is more frightening than an ending. The truth didn't fix anything, I said. Ray gave a dry little laugh. Truth rarely fixes. It removes the lies we were using to stay comfortable. I glanced at him. You always talk like that? Only when young people make me tired. I'm 36. Exactly. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It was small and cracked, but real. Ray smiled faintly. People don't need to understand every scar, he said. They just need to stop poking at it. I looked at the dark street, then at the house behind us. That might be the most honest thing anyone said all weekend. The next morning, I woke in the guest room before the sun had fully cleared the blinds. Old habits woke with me. Listen, identify location, check door, count exits, breathe. The room smelled faintly of lavender detergent and unfamiliar furniture. For one disoriented second, I thought I was in a safe house, waiting for a movement in the hallway. Then the previous night returned in pieces. The dinner table, Derek's laugh, Ray's voice, Thomas's letter, Eli's hand in the photograph, came back engraved into metal. I sat up slowly. My body felt like I had been running for hours, though I had barely moved from a chair. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Not asleep exactly. Quiet in the way houses are after arguments, when even the walls seem to know people have said things they cannot gather back. I dressed in the same navy blouse because I had not packed for emotional excavation. In the mirror, I looked tired but not broken. That distinction mattered. Claire was in the kitchen making coffee. She wore sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her face. Without makeup, with her eyes swollen from crying, she looked less like the perfect hostess and more like the woman who had spent the night realizing perfection had never protected anyone. She turned when I entered. "I'm sorry I invited you into that," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I leaned against the counter. "You invited me to dinner. Derek did the rest. I should have stopped him sooner." "Yes." She flinched, but I did not soften it. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because she deserved the truth and so did I. Claire nodded. I kept thinking if I redirected enough, if I smoothed it over enough, he'd let it go. People like Derek don't let go when the room keeps cushioning the fall. I know that now. You knew some of it before. She looked down at the coffee pot. That was the thing about Claire. She was kind, but kindness had become her camouflage. She softened Derek's edges in public, translated his arrogance into stress, explained his sharpness as humor, apologized around him so often that he rarely had to do it himself. Last night had not only exposed Derek, it had exposed the system that allowed him to remain comfortable. "I wanted you to feel like family," she said. "I know." And I ignored the signs that he was going to push. "Yes." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry." This time, the apology did not ask me to erase anything. It simply stood there. I accepted it with a nod. Claire poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Do you think family can come back from something like that?" I took the mug she offered. "Family isn't a place where nobody hurts you. It's a place where people tell the truth after they do." She held that sentence carefully, like something hot. "I don't know what happens with Derek and me," she admitted. "You don't have to know by breakfast." That made her laugh weakly. We stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while morning light spread across the counters. The same room that had been full of preparation the night before now looked honest in its mess. Plates stacked by the sink, a dish towel on the floor, pie tin half covered in foil. Life after revelation. Derek appeared in his doorway several minutes later. He looked different, though his clothes were similar to what he might have worn any other morning. The difference was not appearance, it was absence. No performance, no sarcastic armor, no confident lean against the door frame. He stood like a man asking permission from a room. "Morning," he said. Claire did not answer immediately. I did. "Morning." He stepped into the kitchen slowly. His eyes were red. I wondered if he had slept at all. "I called my mother," he said. Claire looked up sharply. Derek nodded. "Early. She was awake. I asked her about Dad, about after he came home." His voice roughened. She knew some of it, not details. She said he had nightmares for years, said he kept a locked drawer in his office and told her not to worry about it. She thought it was work papers. After he died, she found letters. Some addressed to me, some never finished. Claire's face softened despite herself. "He never gave them to you?" she asked. Derek shook his head. "No." He looked at me. She said he used to wake up saying someone came back. She thought it was a nightmare phrase. She didn't know it was a person. I gripped my mug tighter. Derek swallowed. "I built my whole idea of him around what he never said," he continued. "I thought silence meant there was nothing there, or nothing important. I made that mistake with you too. It was not enough. But it was something. I want to read more about veteran trauma," he said. "Not as some public thing. I need to understand how much I don't understand. And I want to support the Eli Mercer Scholarship. Quietly, if that's okay." "Do it quietly, Oak," I said. "The people who need help don't need your guilt to become a performance." He nodded. "I know. You're going to want to fix how you feel by doing something visible." His eyes dropped. "Don't," I said. "Start small. Start private. Start by catching yourself before you turn ignorance into accusation." "I will." I believed that he meant it in that moment. I did not know whether he would live up to it. People often mean transformation when the wound is fresh. The test comes later, when shame fades and habits return wearing new clothes. Ray entered with Aunt Beverly behind him. He was dressed for the day already, cardigan buttoned, cane in hand, looking as if he had slept better than all of us. Because old soldiers know exhaustion is not always negotiable. "Coffee?" Claire asked him. "Please." Aunt Beverly patted Derek's arm as she passed him. Not comfort exactly, more like warning disguised as affection. "You look awful." "Yes, ma'am," Derek said. "Good. Means something got through." Ray set a folded envelope on the table in front of me. "What's that?" I asked. "A copy of Thomas's letter." My chest tightened. "Ray, keep it until you know whether you can keep it." "I'm not sure I want it." "I know." That was all he said. No pressure. No speech about closure. Closure is a word people use when they want grief to become tidy. Ray seemed old enough to know better. I took the envelope. Breakfast happened at the same table. That should have felt unbearable, but somehow it did not. Maybe because the table no longer pretended to be innocent. It had witnessed something and remained standing. Claire made eggs and toast. Aunt Beverly cut fruit. Mason came down late, hair messy, face solemn. He looked at me as if unsure whether he was allowed to speak. "You can say good morning," I told him. He exhaled. "Good morning. Good start." That earned a small smile. We ate without the frantic energy of the night before. No one filled every pause. No one forced laughter. Derek asked if anyone wanted more coffee and accepted no as an answer. That sounds small unless you know the kind of man he had been 12 hours earlier. Halfway through breakfast, Mason set down his fork. "Can I ask something?" he said. The whole table tensed. He looked at me quickly. "Not like last night. I mean, I'm asking because I actually want to understand, but you don't have to answer." That mattered. The permission not to answer changes the question. I nodded once. Mason took a breath. How do you live with people calling you a hero when you remember the ones who didn't come home? No one moved. It was the most sincere question anyone had asked me in years. I looked at him. This young man who had deleted the video because he understood some moments were not content, who had read a dead man's letter with more reverence than some adults show the living. You stop trying to feel like a hero, I said. You try to become someone the dead would still recognize. Mason's eyes filled. Claire put a hand over her heart. Derek stared at his plate. I continued. Because once in a while, a good question deserves more than a short answer. You live honestly where you can. You help when help is yours to give. You don't use survival as proof that you deserved more than the people who didn't get it. And you don't let guilt make you useless. The dead don't need us frozen forever at the place we lost them. They need us to carry what they love forward without pretending the carrying doesn't hurt. Ray looked out the window. Aunt Beverly whispered, Amen. After breakfast, I packed my small overnight bag. Claire found me in this guest room doorway. Are you leaving before lunch? She asked. I think that's best. She nodded, though disappointment crossed her face. Will you come to the wedding? I paused. The honest answer was that I did not know. Weddings were hard even without family implosions. Joy made grief louder sometimes. But Claire had stood in the kitchen that morning and told the truth. That counted. Yes, I said. I'll come. Her face crumpled with relief. When she hugged me this time, I did not hesitate. I hugged her back fully, and she held on like someone trying to apologize with her whole body. I'm going to do better, she whispered. Do it for you too, I said. Not just for me. Downstairs, Derek waited near the front door. He did not try to hug me. Good. Instead, he offered his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then shook it. His grip was careful. Thank you for not walking out, he said. I almost did. I know. Remember that feeling before you speak next time? He nodded. I will. Ray walked me to the porch. The morning was bright in that clean, suburban way that makes night drama feel almost impossible. Birds moved through the hedges. A neighbor jogged by with earbuds in, unaware that history had cracked open in the house beside him. The flag by the door shifted gently in the breeze. Ray stood beside me, one hand on his cane. People are careless with what they don't understand, he said. Yes, doesn't make them evil. No, doesn't make it harmless either. I glanced at him. You sure you're not still giving lectures somewhere? I lecture wherever people are foolish enough to feed me. I smiled. He reached into his cardigan pocket and pulled out the old photograph. For a second, panic moved through me, but he did not hand it over. I'll keep the original, he said, unless you want it. I can't. I figured. He tapped the corner where Eli's hand rested on my younger shoulder. But you should know, he looked proud of you. I swallowed hard. He always did, I said, even when I didn't deserve it. Ray's eyes sharpened. Especially then. Probably. The old man was too perceptive by half. I stepped off the porch, then turned back. Ray? Yes? Thank you for saying his name. His expression changed. Softer. Older. Thank you for bringing Thomas home. For once, the words did not feel like a hook in my skin. Maybe because Ray did not say them like he was naming me hero. He said them like he was acknowledging a fact. One grief speaking to another. I nodded and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, just as I had the evening before. Same house, same curb, same steering wheel beneath my hands. But the feeling was different. The night before, the house had been a threat dressed in porch light. Now it was something else. Not safe exactly. Safety is too simple a word. It was a place where the truth had finally had witnesses. A place where a dead man's gratitude had found the woman it was meant for. A place where a cruel joke had become a reckoning. A place where the name I hated had been handled for once with care. Thomas's letter sat on the passenger seat. The challenge coin rested in my pocket. Came back. I touched it through the fabric and thought of Eli. Not the way he died, though That memory was always waiting. I thought of him during training, covered in mud, laughing as I dragged a dummy past the finish line because leaving it behind felt wrong even when the exercise was over. Look at Vale. Once she decides someone is coming home, not even death gets to keep them without a fight. For years, I had thought Gravedog was only a wound, a name wrapped around loss, a sound I endured because Eli's voice had made it sacred and unbearable. But sitting there outside Claire's house, I understood something I had resisted. A wound can also be a promise. That did not make it beautiful. It did not make the pain useful. I hate when people try to make pain useful too quickly, as if suffering has to earn its place by becoming inspiration. Some things hurt because they hurt. Some losses remain losses no matter how many lives grow around them. But Eli had given me that name at the edge of death because he trusted me to keep moving toward the living. Thomas had carried that name home like a lantern he was too ashamed to show his son. Ray had kept it in a box for years, waiting for courage. Derek had mocked it because ignorance often speaks loudest right before truth enters the room. And I had survived all of them. I started the engine. Before I pulled away, I looked once more at the house. Claire stood in the doorway now, arms wrapped around herself. Derek was behind her, not touching her, giving her space. Ray stood near the window, one hand raised. Mason appeared briefly over Claire's shoulder and lifted his phone, then seemed to think better of it and simply waved. I waved back. Then I drove. The road out of the neighborhood curved past identical lawns and quiet mailboxes. Sunlight flashed between tree branches. Somewhere, people were buying groceries, walking dogs, arguing about brunch, living ordinary lives that had no idea how extraordinary ordinary could be when someone almost did not come home. I thought about Derek's mistake. It would be easy to say his mistake was not knowing my story. But that was not it. Most people will never know the stories around them. They will sit beside strangers in waiting rooms, stand behind them in coffee lines, marry into their families, pass them plates at dinner, and never know what names hurt to hear. They will not know which jokes land on graves. They will not know which silences are chosen and which were forced. They will not know whose father came home because someone else's friend did not. Not knowing is human. Assuming ignorance gives you permission to be cruel is the mistake. Derek had believed my silence was an invitation to suspicion. He had believed a lack of details meant a lack of truth. He had believed respect had to be earned in front of him, according to his rules under his examination. He had not understood that some people are quiet because the price of speaking is too high, and some stories are not hidden because they are false, but because they are heavy. You do not have to understand someone's past to respect the weight of it. That is what I wish I had said before the letter, before the safe, before Ray's voice cut through the room. But maybe some truths arrive only after the damage shows everyone where to look. 2 days later, I went to the wedding. I almost did not. Weddings are dangerous places for people with complicated relationships to hope. The music asks you to believe in new beginnings. The flowers ask you to believe beauty can survive planning committees and family politics. The vows ask you to believe people can promise a future without knowing what it will cost them. For someone like me, who had spent years measuring promises against body bags and classified paperwork, the optimism of weddings could feel almost violent. But I had told Claire I would come, and I had spent too much of my life knowing the cost of broken promises. The ceremony was held under a white tent at a vineyard outside Leesburg. The sky was clear, the grass smelled freshly cut. Guests fanned themselves with programs and pretended not to cry before anything emotional had happened. White chairs stood in clean rows. A string quartet played something soft enough to make everyone behave. The bride's friends moved around in satin dresses, whispering urgently about flowers, makeup, and whether the groom's boutonniere was crooked. I parked at the far edge of the lot where I could leave easily if I needed to. Habit again. I sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel. The envelope with Thomas's letter was not with me. I had left it at home in a drawer I had opened and closed 3 times that morning. The challenge coin was in my pocket. I told myself I had brought it by accident, but that was not true. Some objects become anchors before we admit we are drifting. When I stepped onto the lawn, Claire saw me first. She was standing beside Derek near the second row, wearing a pale blue dress and holding a program folded so tightly it had creased in 4 places. She looked relieved when she spotted me, then immediately worried, as if relief itself had become dangerous. Derek stood beside her with his hands clasped in front of him. He had the same polished haircut, the same expensive jacket, the same physical presence, but something had changed in the way he occupied space. He was no longer leaning into the room like he expected it to make way for him. He saw me for 1 second. Old habit moved across his face, the instinct to perform, to smooth, to manage the optics of apology. Then he stopped himself. He gave me a small nod from across the lawn and turned back to Claire. Good, I thought. Start there. Ray sat near the aisle with Aunt Beverly. When I took the chair beside him, he looked at my outfit and said, "You clean up like trouble. You flirt with everyone at weddings? Only veterans and widows. They have better stories." Aunt Beverly smacked his arm lightly with her program. Behave. I am behaving. This is my behaved version. I laughed. It surprised me again, that laugh. Not because it was loud. It wasn't. But because it came easily. During the vows, I found myself watching the couple beneath the arch promise patience, kindness, faithfulness. Everyone likes those words when flowers are around them. The real test comes later, at dinner tables, in hallways, in kitchens the morning after someone tells the truth. Love is not proven in perfect rooms. It is proven when the room breaks and people decide whether to rebuild with honesty or wallpaper over the cracks. Claire cried during the ceremony. Derek did not put an arm around her automatically. I noticed that. Before, he might have used comfort as a gesture of ownership, a way to show the room he knew how to be tender. This time, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered something. She nodded. Only then did he hand her a tissue. A small thing. But small things are where arrogance begins to learn manners. At the reception, Mason approached me with 2 glasses of lemonade and handed me one. "No phone," he said immediately, holding up his empty hand. I noticed. He smiled sheepishly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about becoming someone the dead would recognize." "Yeah, that was a heavy thing to drop on you." I asked. "You did?" He looked across the tent where Derek was speaking quietly with Ray. "Do you think Uncle Derek can change?" I followed his gaze. Derek stood with his hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed as Ray spoke. He was listening, truly listening. That did not guarantee transformation, but it was the first visible evidence of humility I had ever seen in him. "I think people can change when the truth costs them something," I said, "but only if they keep paying attention after the pain stops feeling new." Mason nodded, absorbing that. "My dad says Uncle Derek has always been like that," he said, "needing to be the smartest guy in the room. Then maybe he needs to spend more time in rooms where he isn't." Mason grinned. "Ray's room? Ray's room might kill him." Fair. We stood at the edge of the tent while people clapped for the first dance. Mason's attention kept drifting toward the videographer, the camera, the glowing phones held above heads. Finally, he said, "It's weird. I used to think recording something meant I was preserving it, but sometimes it feels like taking it away from the people inside it. That's not a small thing to understand." He shrugged like the compliment embarrassed him. I almost posted that clip the other night, before I realized what was happening. It would have been easy. People love watching somebody get exposed. People love exposure when they don't have to clean up afterward. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly it." He looked younger again when he said that, but not foolish. There was a difference. Later, Derek found me near the edge of the reception lawn. He approached slowly, leaving enough space that I could leave if I wanted. I appreciated that. People underestimate the apology of distance. I donated to the scholarship, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Quietly, he added quickly. Anonymous. I just wanted you to know I followed through. Good. And I read the first few articles you recommended about trauma, survivor guilt, moral injury. How was that? Uncomfortable. That usually means you're not wasting your time. He nodded. A band started playing under the tent. Someone cheered as the bride and groom began their first dance. Derek looked toward the music, then back at me. I keep thinking about all the things my father must have carried without telling me. You'll never know all of them. I know. That's hard. Yes. I waited. He looked down at his hands. I used to think his silence meant weakness or distance. I was angry at him for it. After he got sick, I told myself he had chosen not to know me. Now I wonder if he was trying not to hand me what he couldn't carry. Maybe. Does that make it better? No. He gave a faint, sad smile. I figured. Understanding someone's wound doesn't mean it didn't hurt you. His eyes lifted. That seemed to matter to him, though I had not said it to comfort him. Truth often helps more than comfort because it does not ask anyone to lie. I'm going to visit his grave next week, Derek said. Read the letter there? That sounds right. I wish he had told me. I know. I wish I had been the kind of son he could tell. That was the first thing he said that made me feel real sympathy for him. Derek, I said, children are not responsible for making parents honest about trauma. He blinked. You were his son, not his confessor. His face tightened. I don't know what to do with that. Then don't do anything yet. Just don't turn it into another reason to hate yourself dramatically. A startled laugh escaped him. I looked at him. I mean it. Guilt can become vanity if you polish it too much. His smile faded into something thoughtful. Claire said something similar. Claire is smart. Yes, he said softly. She is. Across the tent, Claire watched us with careful eyes. Not anxious exactly, aware. When Derek returned to her, he did not put his hand on her back automatically the way I had seen him do before. He asked something. She answered. Then, after a moment, she took his hand. Not forgiveness, not full repair. A beginning, maybe. Ray joined me after sunset, carrying 2 slices of wedding cake on small plates. I brought provisions, he said. Is one of those for me? No, I eat in pairs now. Doctor's orders. I took one anyway. We stood under string lights while guests danced and the hills darkened beyond the vineyard. Eli would have hated this cake, I said after one bite. Ray looked over. Why? Too fancy. He believed cake should not need explanation. A wise man. He was. For the first time in years, saying Eli's name did not feel like opening a wound with dirty hands. It hurt, but cleanly. Ray noticed. Of course he did. You should visit the scholarship office sometime, he said. They have letters from recipients, young medics, nursing students, a few veterans retraining in emergency care. Thomas wanted it that way. I don't know if I'm ready. Readiness is overrated, but waiting is allowed. I nodded. The band shifted to something slow. Claire danced with Derek. They were a little stiff together, but they stayed. Mason danced badly with a cousin and made everyone laugh. Aunt Beverly had somehow convinced 2 widowers to bring her punch. The bride spun under the lights, laughing, her dress catching the evening like a sail. The world went on. That used to offend me after loss. How dare music play? How dare people eat cake? How dare sunlight come back over places where someone had died? But over time, I began to understand that the world continuing was not always insult. Sometimes it was invitation, not to forget. Never that. But to carry the dead into rooms where laughter still existed, to let their names sit beside ordinary joy. A month after the wedding, I received a letter. It came to my small apartment in Alexandria, addressed in careful handwriting I did not recognize. Inside was a note from Derek's mother, Elaine Whitman. Claire must have asked before giving her my address, because Claire knew better by then. The first line said exactly that. Claire asked me before sending this. I hope it is all right. Elaine wrote that she had found Thomas's unfinished letters in the locked drawer. She had read them slowly, sometimes only a page a day. She wrote that she had lived beside his nightmares for years without knowing their names. She had thought love meant letting him keep his silence. Maybe sometimes it had. Maybe sometimes it had not. There was no accusation in her letter, no demand that I tell her more. Just gratitude, grief, and one photograph tucked into the envelope. It showed Thomas years after the rescue, older, standing beside a teenage Derek in a backyard. Derek held a baseball bat. Thomas stood slightly behind him, one hand on his shoulder. His face looked tired but proud. On the back, Elaine had written, "Because he came home." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with that photograph in front of me. Because he came home? Derek grew up with a father, even if that father was wounded and silent. Because Eli did not come home, a scholarship carried his name into futures he never saw. Because Thomas carried shame, Ray carried a letter. Because Ray kept the letter, Derek learned the truth late, but not never. Because Claire invited me to dinner, everything broke open. Because I stayed, the truth had witnesses. Life is unbearable when you look at it as a chain of costs. It is also dishonest to pretend the costs are not there. I placed Elaine's photograph beside the copy of Thomas's letter. Then I took out the challenge coin and set it between them. Came back. For years, those words had felt like accusation. Why did you come back when others didn't? Why did you survive when Eli didn't? Why did your hands save strangers, but not your friend? That day, they felt different. Not painless, never painless, but different. Came back did not only mean returned from a building, a mission, a country, a war. It could mean returning to the living after years of standing emotionally at the edge of the dead. It could mean entering a family dinner when every instinct said, run. It could mean answering a sincere question. It could mean letting someone say thank you without turning it into punishment. It could mean allowing one small part of yourself to come home long after your body did. I started working with the Veteran Transition Program 2 weeks later. My job was not glamorous. Mostly paperwork, appointments, phone calls, rides arranged, forms corrected, benefits explained for the third or fourth time, because trauma makes bureaucracy even crueler than it already is. I sat with veterans who did not trust chairs unless they faced doors. I sat with spouses who whispered, "I don't know who came home." I sat with young men who laughed too loudly and old women who had never once been called heroes, though they had carried entire wars in silence. The first week, I tried too hard. I arrived early, stayed late, organized files no one had asked me to organize, and answered emails at midnight as if speed could prove I belonged somewhere again. My supervisor, a former Army nurse named Marisol, watched me with increasing suspicion until Friday afternoon, when she closed my laptop with one hand while I was typing. "Go home," she said. "I'm almost done." "You were almost done 2 hours ago?" "I can finish this." "You can," she said. "But you are not saving anyone by making yourself impossible to live with." I stared at her. She had kind eyes and no patience, which I respected immediately. "I'm fine," I said. "Every veteran who says that in this building owes me $5. I leaned back. "That seems predatory." "It funds the coffee." "The coffee is terrible." "Then imagine how many people say they're fine." I did not laugh, but I almost did. Marisol pointed toward the door. "You get to help here, Nora. You do not get to reenact your whole nervous system on our filing cabinet." That sentence landed too accurately for me to defend against. So I went home. The apartment felt too quiet that night. I reheated soup, forgot it in the microwave, reheated it again, then sat at the table with Thomas's letter sealed in the drawer beside me. I had not read it all the way through by myself yet. Hearing Mason read those lines at dinner had been enough. too much, but the drawer seemed to know what it held. The whole room leaned toward it. At 10:30, I opened the drawer. At 10:32, I closed it again. At 11, I opened it. This time, I took out the envelope. Thomas's handwriting was careful, almost formal, the kind of writing men used when they had been taught that neatness could substitute for vulnerability. I read the lines Mason had read aloud. Then I read beyond them. Thomas wrote about the sound of my boots returning through debris. He wrote that he had hated me in the moment because I made him stand when he wanted permission to die. He wrote that for months after coming home, Derek's laughter had felt like both a gift and a punishment. He wrote that he had gone to Derek's baseball games and sometimes had to grip the bleachers until the panic passed because the crack of the bat sounded too much like distant shots. Near the end, he wrote, "I have spent years trying to decide whether living is something I earned or something I was given. Maybe it is both. Maybe the only honest answer is to spend the rest of it less carelessly." I put the letter down and cried in a way I had not cried after the mission. Not cleanly, not beautifully. I cried with my elbows on the table and my hands over my face, furious at Thomas, grateful to him, sorry for him, angry that Eli could not read his own name in that letter, angry that I had not known the scholarship existed, angry that I had spent so long thinking I was the only one carrying that night. When the crying stopped, I felt emptied but not healed. Healing is not one dramatic collapse. It is not a letter. It is not a coin. It is not an apology at a dinner table. Healing is what you do the next morning when the objects are still there and the dead are still dead. So the next morning, I went back to work. There was a Marine named Lucas who came in every Tuesday for 6 weeks and refused to fill out a medical form because the question, "Describe the event," made his hands shake. The first time he shoved the paper away and said, "It's stupid. I'm stupid." I turned the form face down. "You're not stupid," I said. "Some boxes are too small for what happened." He stared at me as if I had spoken a language he had been waiting years to hear. Then he cried with his jaw clenched, angry at every tear. I sat with him until he stopped apologizing. There was a former Army driver named Renee, whose family kept calling her dramatic because she left Thanksgiving early after someone popped a champagne cork behind her. She told me she had ruined the holiday. I asked if the holiday had been ruined by her leaving, or by no one caring why she needed to. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I never thought of it that way. There was an old Navy mechanic who came in wearing a ball cap from a ship decommissioned before I was born. He did not want benefits. He wanted someone to help him write a letter to a daughter he had not spoken to in 12 years. He spent 20 minutes describing the truck he drove, the weather that day, the cost of stamps, anything except what he wanted to say. Finally, I asked, 'Do you want her to know you are sorry? Or do you want her to tell you that you are forgiven?' He took off his hat and held it in both hands. 'Those are different?' 'Yes.' He looked down at the brim. 'Then I'd better start with sorry.' People think healing is soft. It is not. Healing is often the hard, unromantic work of telling the truth without letting it destroy every room you enter. Derek wrote once more, 3 months after the dinner. Not a long letter, just a page. He said he had visited Thomas's grave and read the letter aloud. He said he had apologized to his father for judging silence as weakness. He said he had started volunteering quietly with a local organization that helped families of contractors and service members navigate benefits. He emphasized quietly twice, which made me smile despite myself. At the end, he wrote, "I am learning that respect given before understanding is not blind. It is humble." I kept that line, not because Derek had redeemed himself completely. People are not redeemed by one lesson, one donation, one apology, one tearful night. Redemption, if it exists, is repetition. It is choosing differently until the choice becomes character. But he was learning, and so was I. The next time I saw Claire, We met for lunch at a small cafe, halfway between our neighborhoods. She looked lighter, though not untouched by what had happened. She told me she and Derek were in counseling. She told me he was listening more and performing less. She told me she was learning to stop translating his sharp edges for other people. I thought keeping peace meant preventing conflict, she said, stirring her coffee. Now, I think sometimes peace is what happens after the right conflict. That sounds like something Ray would say, she groaned. Please don't tell me I'm becoming Uncle Ray. There are worse fates, she smiled. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. This came from the scholarship office, she said. Ray thought you might want to see it. No pressure. Inside was a copy of a thank you letter from a young woman named Alina Mercer. Not related to Eli, despite the last name. She was a nursing student and former Navy corpsman using scholarship funds to complete trauma care training. She wrote that she had never met Eli Mercer but had read the short description attached to the scholarship. Teammate, medic, friend, remembered for bringing courage and humor into impossible places. At the bottom, she had written, I hope I can become the kind of person who goes back for people. I had to set the page down. Claire reached across the table, then stopped herself, remembering. This time I took her hand. Some grief does not shrink. It makes room. A year passed. Not cleanly. Years never do. There were bad nights. There were mornings when the old mission returned in dreams so vivid I woke tasting smoke. There were days when the word hero still made me want to leave a room. There were moments when I took out Thomas's letter and hated him a little for making me carry his gratitude too late. Then I forgave him. Then I hated him again. Grief is not a straight road. It doubles back without warning. But there were good things too. The veteran program grew. Mason interviewed Ray for a private family history project and did not post a second of it online. Aunt Beverly sent me apple pie every Thanksgiving with a note that said, still not as good as mine, but edible. Claire and I became closer in a way that felt earned rather than hoped for. Derek, slowly and imperfectly, became easier to sit beside. And every year, on the anniversary of the mission, I said Eli's name out loud. The first year after the dinner, I said it alone. The second year, Ray said it with me. The third year, Derek asked if he could come to the scholarship ceremony. I almost said no. Then I thought of Thomas, of shame locked in drawers, of letters arriving too late. I thought of Eli, who had believed the living were meant to keep moving. I thought of Mason's question. How do you live with people calling you a hero when you remember the ones who didn't come home? You stop trying to feel like a hero. You try to become someone the dead would still recognize. So I told Derek he could come. At the ceremony, held in a modest community center with bad coffee and folding chairs, Derek stood in the back. He did not introduce himself as Thomas Whitman's son. He did not tell anyone his father had been rescued. He did not mention me. He simply listened while 3 scholarship recipients spoke about their training, their plans, the people they hoped to serve. When the event ended, he walked to a donation table, wrote a check, folded it once, and left it without a name. Quietly, I saw. I did not thank him. He did not need me to. A few weeks after that ceremony, Derek asked if I would go with him to Thomas's grave. He asked through Claire, which told me he had learned something. Not enough to make him fearless, but enough to understand that direct pressure could feel like a demand. Claire called me on a Wednesday evening while I was washing dishes and said, Derek wants to ask you something, and I told him I would ask first if asking was acceptable. That is a lot of asking. I know. We're learning. What does he want? He wants to visit Thomas's grave with you. He says he has questions, but he also says you don't owe him answers. The old me would have refused before she finished the sentence. The old me had survived by treating every request as a door that could lock behind me. But I was learning that boundaries did not have to mean permanent exile. Sometimes they meant choosing the terms under which you remained. Tell him I'll go, I said, but not to answer everything. And not for long, Claire exhaled. I'll tell him, Thomas Whitman was buried in a quiet cemetery outside Falls Church beneath an oak tree that threw wide shade over the older stones. Derek arrived before me. He stood near the grave with his hands in the pockets of a dark coat, looking less like the man from the dinner and more like the boy from Elaine's photograph, the one holding a baseball bat with his father's hand on his shoulder. He turned when I approached. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You get 30 minutes. That's more than I expected." "Then use them well." A faint smile touched his mouth and vanished. The headstone was simple. Thomas Andrew Whitman, beloved husband and father. The dates looked too small for a whole life. There were fresh flowers at the base. "Elaine's work," Derek said. "She came every Sunday when the weather allowed." Derek held a folded copy of the letter. "I read it here once," he said, "but I couldn't get through it. You don't have to perform grief for the dead. They already know." He looked at me, startled, then nodded. For several minutes, we stood in silence. Then he said, "What was he like that night?" I looked at the headstone, scared. Derek absorbed that. "I know people want noble answers," I continued. "They want to hear their loved ones were brave, composed, thinking profound thoughts. Sometimes they were. Often they were scared. Your father was scared." Derek's jaw moved. "Did that disappoint you?" "No. Fear is not a character flaw. It's information. It tells you the body understands the situation." "He always taught me to hide fear." "Maybe because he was afraid of how much of it he had." Derek lowered his head. "He talked about you," I said. His eyes closed. "He said my son, more than once. That was the piece of him that stayed oriented when everything else was breaking." Derek wiped his face quickly with the back of one hand. "I was angry at him for years," he admitted. "He came home different. I was a kid, then a teenager. I didn't have words for it. I just knew he would disappear into himself. He missed things. He sat in the garage sometimes with the lights off. He hated fireworks. He'd snap if I came up behind him, then apologize like I had caught him stealing. I thought he loved me less after he came back." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. Derek looked at me. "No," I repeated softer. "A wounded man may fail to show love clearly. That is not the same as loving less." His face folded under the sentence. He read the letter then. "Not all of it." "Enough." His voice shook through the line about the boy with the baseball glove. It broke entirely when Thomas wrote that returning to Derek had been the greatest mercy and the greatest burden of his life. When he finished, Derek crouched and placed the folded page against the stone. "I don't know how to forgive him," he said. I stood beside him, wind moving through the oak leaves above us. "Then don't start with forgiveness. Start with truth." "What truth?" "That he loved you, that he hurt you, that he survived something he didn't know how to explain, that you became cruel in some places because you mistook armor for inheritance, that none of those truths cancels the others." Derek stayed crouched for a long time. When he stood, he looked exhausted. "You sound like Ray now," he said. I have decided to take that as an insult and a compliment. "It's both." On the way back to the cars, he stopped. "Nora?" "Yes?" "Did you ever visit Eli's grave?" The question struck clean through me. No. Derek did not ask why. That, too, was progress. I had reasons, of course. Cowardice rarely appears without paperwork. Eli was buried in Pennsylvania near the town where he grew up. I knew the cemetery. I knew the section. I knew because his sister Mara had sent me the information after the funeral, along with a note I had never answered properly. I had been hospitalized during the service. Later, when I could have gone, I told myself it was too late. Then, too much time had passed. Then time itself became the excuse. Derek looked at the ground. "I'm not saying you should." "I know. I just wondered. The worst thing about people learning humility is that sometimes they ask the right question." That night, I took Mara Mercer's old letter from a file box in my closet. The paper had softened at the folds. Her handwriting was round and impatient-looking, like Eli's when he wrote quickly. She had said she did not blame me. She had said Eli talked about me in almost every call home. She had said if I ever wanted to visit, there would be a place at her table. I had read that letter dozens of times and never believed it. A week later, I called her. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone when she answered. Mara, it's Nora Vale. There was silence. Then a sound. A breath pulled through years. Nora, she said. I'm sorry, I said immediately. I'm sorry I waited this long. I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. The words came out in a rush, ugly and unorganized. I had imagined this call for years, and in every imagined version, I spoke with dignity. Real grief never respects rehearsal. Mara cried first, then laughed, then said, You idiot! We never needed you to save him twice. That broke me. She said, Eli had loved me like family. She said he would have haunted me for being dramatic, then stolen my fries. She said their mother had died 2 years earlier, but had kept a photograph of Eli and me on the mantle until the end. She said I was still welcome. So I went. Pennsylvania in October looked like a painting trying not to brag. The trees burned gold and red along the highway. I drove with both hands on the wheel, the challenge coin in the cup holder, Mara's address printed on paper because I did not trust myself to rely on a phone. The closer I got, the more my body argued with me. Turn around, send flowers, write a letter, do anything except arrive. But I had spent too many years letting fear call itself respect. Mara lived in a white farmhouse with blue shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. She came outside before I reached the steps. She was shorter than Eli had been, with the same wide mouth and the same eyes that looked amused even when she was crying. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then she said, You look exactly like he described. Exhausted and irritated? Competent and allergic to compliments. I laughed and cried at the same time. She hugged me without asking. I let her. Not because asking did not matter, but because some embraces arrive from the dead through the living, and refusing them would have been another kind of running. Inside, her kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon. There were photographs everywhere. Eli as a child missing 2 front teeth. Eli in high school holding a trumpet. Eli in uniform. Eli with me and 2 other teammates, all of us sunburned and stupidly young, making faces at a camera after a training evolution. I had forgotten that photo existed. Mara watched me see it. He sent that one with a note, she said. He wrote, That's Vale. She looks mean because she cares about everyone and hates that we know. I covered my mouth. Sounds like him, I managed. He loved you. I know. Do you? The question was gentle, which made it harder. I looked at the photo. My younger self looked annoyed, tired, alive. Eli had one arm thrown over my shoulders. He was grinning, like the world had not yet dared to prove him wrong. I'm trying to, I said. Mara drove me to the cemetery after lunch. Eli's grave sat under a maple tree, not far from his parents. The stone had his full name, dates, and a line from a poem I recognized only because he used to quote it badly to irritate me. There were small flags near several graves. The grass was trimmed. The air smelled like leaves and cold earth. I stood before his name and felt nothing at first. That scared me more than crying would have. Then Mara touched the stone with 2 fingers and said, Hey, idiot, look who finally showed up. And the grief came. I sank to my knees before I realized I had moved. Mara knelt beside me but did not touch me. She let me break in front of the carved name of the man who had given me mine. I'm sorry, I said to the stone. I'm sorry. I went back. I did what you said. I tried. I kept trying. I hated you sometimes for making me promise without asking. I hated myself more. I missed you every day and pretended missing you was discipline. The wind moved through the maple leaves. Mara cried quietly beside me. After a long time, she said, He'd be furious you made that speech without snacks. I laughed through tears so hard I had to sit back on my heels. That was Mara's gift. Eli's gift too. They refused to let grief become a cathedral where no one could laugh. Before we left, I placed the challenge coin against Eli's stone for a moment. Not to give it away, to show him. Came back, I said. I'm trying. Mara took me back to the house and packed me leftovers like I was a college student leaving home. Before I drove away, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. Open it later, she said. Not while driving. You look like someone who would crash emotionally before physically. That is uncomfortably accurate. Eli said I was perceptive. Eli said a lot of things, most of them true. At a rest stop halfway back to Virginia, I opened the envelope. Inside was a note in Eli's handwriting. Well, Mara says I should write these things down because apparently people are not psychic, which is inconvenient. If anything ever happens to me, do not become dramatic and noble about it. I know you. You will try to turn guilt into a full-time job. Quit it. If I go first, you are allowed to be mad at impossible and rude at my funeral. But you are not allowed to disappear forever. Keep dragging the living out of holes. Also, eat real food. Coffee is not a meal, no matter what you claim. Gravedog is not a curse. It means death has to negotiate with you. Eli, I read the note once, then again. Then I folded it carefully and sat in the car until the sky went dark. That night, when I got home, I placed Eli's note beside Thomas's letter, Elaine's photograph, and the challenge coin. 4 objects, 4 versions of the same night: survivor, witness, family, friend. For the first time, the drawer did not feel like a locked room. It felt like an altar I had not meant to build. The following spring, Ray had a health scare. It was not dramatic in the way movies make old men's bodies dramatic. No sudden collapse at a family table, no thunderstorm, no tearful hospital speech delivered under fluorescent lights. He simply got dizzy in his kitchen, sat down before he fell, and called Aunt Beverly because he was wise enough to know stubbornness should not be fatal. She drove him to the hospital while scolding him so loudly, the nurse at intake asked if she was his wife. Worse, Ray told the nurse, my sister. When Claire called me, I was at the transition office helping Lucas reschedule a therapy appointment. He claimed he did not need, but refused to miss. I drove to the hospital after work with a grocery store bouquet I knew Ray would mock. He was sitting upright in bed, wearing a hospital gown under his cardigan, because he had apparently bullied someone into retrieving it from home. Aunt Beverly sat beside him doing a crossword puzzle with the intensity of a prosecutor. Ray saw the flowers and grimaced. I'm not dead. Then you can enjoy them. They look like a hostage situation. Aunt Beverly did not look up. So do you. The doctors said Ray needed rest, fewer arguments, and less coffee. Ray said he was willing to consider one of those. Claire stood at the foot of the bed, worried enough that her smile trembled. Derek arrived with Elaine, carrying a paper bag of Ray's favorite sandwiches despite the posted dietary restrictions. Mason came last, breathless, with a notebook, because Ray had been helping him organize the family history project. Watching them gather around that hospital bed, I realized something that unsettled me with its tenderness. The dinner had not made us a perfect family. It had not healed old damage or erased Derek's arrogance or removed Claire's habit of managing everyone's feelings, but it had changed the direction of our honesty. People were no longer pretending silence was always peace. Ray waved Mason closer. Did you bring the recorder? Mason glanced at me. Only if everyone agrees. Ray looked pleased. Good. You learned something. Mason set up the recorder after asking every person in the room. Then he asked Ray about Vietnam, about Thomas, about the years after, about why men of his generation kept so many things locked away. Ray answered slowly. Not everything. Enough. At one point, he looked at Derek and said, We thought silence protected children. Sometimes it only left them alone with their own explanations. Derek lowered his eyes. Elaine reached for his hand. I stood near the window, listening, feeling the strange ache of a room learning how to pass memory without turning it into a weapon. When Ray came home a few days later, he asked me to visit. He was sitting on his porch with a blanket over his knees and a mug of forbidden coffee beside him. I pretended not to notice. He pretended not to know I noticed. "I need you to take something," he said. "If it's medical advice, I refuse." "It's a copy of the scholarship records." "Ray, I'm not dying this week. Calm down." "That is not as comforting as you think." He smiled, then reached beside his chair and handed me a folder. Inside were donor records, letters, photographs, and a short history of the Eli Mercer Scholarship. Thomas's name was not visible anywhere public, just as Ray had said, but inside the folder, carefully tucked behind the first page, was a handwritten note from Thomas to Ray explaining why he wanted the fund kept anonymous. "If my name is attached to it," Thomas had written, "people may mistake guilt for generosity. Let Eli's name do the work. He earned that much." I closed the folder slowly. Ray watched me. "You don't have to run it. You don't have to do anything today, but someday someone should know where the pieces are." "Why me?" "Because it belongs to your story too, whether you like it or not." I looked at the trees beyond his porch. I used to think belonging to a story meant being trapped by it. Sometimes it means getting a vote in how it is told. That stayed with me. Months passed. Ray recovered enough to insult everyone properly again. Derek continued volunteering quietly. Claire began speaking more directly, sometimes so directly that Aunt Beverly declared she had created a monster and was proud. Mason finished his private family film and showed it at Thanksgiving. There were no viral clips, no humiliating edits, no dramatic soundtrack. Just interviews, photographs, old recipes, jokes, gaps, tears, and names spoken carefully. When Eli's name appeared, it was not over battle footage or patriotic music. It was over a still image of the scholarship letters and Ray's voice saying, "A man is not gone while his name still teaches the living how to behave." Derek cried when Thomas appeared. So did Elaine. So did I when Eli's note filled the screen for 3 quiet seconds. That Thanksgiving, we ate at Claire and Derek's house again. The same dining room, the same table, different chairs because Claire had finally replaced the wobbly one Derek always refused to fix. Roast turkey instead of chicken, sweet potatoes instead of mashed potatoes, apple pie because Aunt Beverly claimed Claire needed supervision. I sat with my back partly to the wall, but not fully. That was my compromise with progress. Derek did not comment. Halfway through dinner, a cousin I barely knew began to ask a question about my service. I saw Derek notice. He set his fork down, not dramatically, and said, "Let Nora decide what she wants to talk about." The cousin blinked. "I didn't mean anything." "I know," Derek said. "That's usually when people need to be careful." The table went quiet for 1 second. Then Aunt Beverly said, "Pass the gravy before it dies of neglect." And the room moved on. I looked at Derek across the table. He did not look proud of himself. He did not look at me for approval. He simply went back to his meal. That was when I believed more than I had at the wedding or the cemetery or the scholarship ceremony that something in him had truly changed. Not because he made a speech, but because he interrupted harm before it became a performance. After dinner, I went to the porch alone. The air was cold. The flag by the doorway had been taken down for winter. The hedges were bare in places. The street looked ordinary again, but ordinary no longer felt like a threat. I heard laughter through the window, dishes clinking, Claire telling Derek to stop hovering near the sink unless he planned to wash something. Ray's low voice rumbled beneath Aunt Beverly's sharper one. I took the challenge coin from my pocket. "Came back." I carried those words differently now. I'd come back to the house. I had come back to Eli's grave. I had come back to work that mattered without letting it consume me whole. I had come back to a table where I had once been mocked and found not perfection, but effort. The porch door opened and Claire stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. Ray made it, she said, so it might be illegal. Strong? Hostile! I took the mug. She stood beside me. I'm glad you came. This time, the sentence did not sound like pleading. It sounded like gratitude with room for my choice. Me too, I said. Inside, Derek laughed at something Mason said. It was not the brittle laugh from that first dinner. It was smaller, less certain, more human. Claire looked through the window. We're still working. Everyone is. Do you ever get tired of that? Yes. What do you do then? I thought about Eli's note, Thomas's letter, Ray's porch, the Marine with the medical form, Renee at Thanksgiving, Mason deleting the clip, Derek standing at his father's grave, Claire learning that peace was not the same as silence. I rest, I said. Then I try again. She nodded. We stood there until the cold drove us back inside. That night, before I left, Ray pressed a slice of pie wrapped in foil into my hand. For the road, he said. I live 20 minutes away. Then eat slowly. Aunt Beverly appeared behind him. He means thank you. I do not need translation. You absolutely do. I hugged Ray carefully. His bones felt sharper than they used to, but his arms were strong around me. Keep saying his name, he murmured. I will. When I drove home, the pie sat on the passenger seat beside my bag. The challenge coin was in my pocket. Eli's note was safe in the drawer at home. Thomas's letter was there too. The story was no longer locked inside any one object, any one room, any one night. It had moved into the living. That is what I want you to understand, if you have stayed with me this long. The dinner was not important because Derek was humiliated. Humiliation is easy. The world is full of it. People record it, post it, laugh at it, call it justice when sometimes it is only appetite. What mattered was what happened after the humiliation. What mattered was whether anyone learned reverence. What mattered was whether the people at that table became more careful with silence, more humble around pain, more willing to ask without demanding, apologize without performing, remember without stealing. Derek's mistake was not that he did not know my story. Most people will never know the stories around them. They will sit beside strangers in waiting rooms, stand behind them in coffee lines, marry into their families, pass them plates at dinner, and never know what names hurt to hear. They will not know which jokes land on graves. They will not know which silences are chosen and which were forced. They will not know whose father came home because someone else's friend did not. Not knowing is human. Assuming ignorance gives you permission to be cruel is the mistake. Do not turn someone's silence into suspicion just because you are uncomfortable not knowing. Do not mistake access for intimacy. Do not demand proof of pain before offering basic decency. And never laugh at a name you do not understand. Because sometimes the quietest person at the table is carrying the reason someone else got to come home.